Yo, what up? I kind of got inspired to make a little video like this because I feel like it's kind of a slept on skill for speedrunners, particularly in terms of improvement. I mean, if you're trying to improve at anything, using some form of like video review process is almost always going to be beneficial, excuse me, in some manner or another. But in particular, I was kind of inspired to make this because there was a question somebody had asked at one point is like, X player does this split so fast, like 3 minute split or something. Whenever I do it, I can't get any faster than like 3 minutes and 10 seconds. I don't understand where I'm losing the time. And a lot of times that turns out to be like little things. Not always. Sometimes there's like a big, single 10-second mistake. Normally, though, you can tell when that happens, right? You make some huge 10-second mistake and you're like, ah, man, I lost all that time. That sucks. Other times it's a bit more subtle and it's like in the little stuff. And so what I'm kind of wanting to talk about today is how using VOD review can help you see where that subtle stuff is at. And a lot of times it can kind of elevate your level of play, or at least make you aware of a level of play that maybe you weren't particularly aware of. I find myself going through this process continually, all the time, whether I'm watching other people's runs or whether I'm watching my own runs back to like look for mistakes and things like that. And that's kind of what I want to get into. So let's just say hypothetically, I have a time in a PB. We'll work with this, right? I've got a hero mode uh, clip here from my PB. So the desert drive split starts right here at this black screen. You see I go ahead and I split right here in my sub splits. So the split starts here. The time ends whenever we get into the water with Dex Warp and the screen goes black again for another load, right? So here, this time comes out roughly to about a 145. At the time that I had done this run, the community gold split for the desert drive, I want to say was like a 142-ish, maybe a little lower. I could just barely tie that gold if I was playing like cracked out of my mind. So somewhere in the mix of all these things, I was losing about 3 seconds on average. And I really didn't know why. The drive felt good. It felt clean. Most of the time there weren't like super major mistakes. If there was a major mistake, I didn't really, of course I knew that that was the source of time loss. But there was like an elusive 2 or 3 seconds that I never could seem to kind of pin down. So I decided, as one should, to compare with somebody else's gold, preferably one who's better than yours. We have community golds or Jack 3, thank goodness. So I used Wotan's run here. So I'm going to quickly edit these so that I can do side-by-side. Doing side-by-side comparisons is incredibly helpful, not necessarily required. But again, if you have some way of like taking video footage and putting them side by side, I would highly recommend it because it is an invaluable tool. So I'm mostly concerned with the actual driving portion. I'm not too concerned with trying to the movement getting to the car. I'm pretty confident in that, we'll say. All right, so this is more or less where the drive comparison starts. So if I'm just going to walk through this process and kind of do what I actually do, when I'm doing this on my own. So I line them up as best I can. We seem to boost right around the same time. Okay, nothing crazy going on there. We jump right about the same time. The spacing is what's changing there. Our speed is going to be the same. He looks like he cuts that a little bit closer than I do, but not too much. Let's go back for just a second. If you watch, the placement of his jump is a little bit different than mine. And he's actually a little further ahead than me. That can be due to a line, or maybe he kept his jump lower. I'm not really 100% sure. That's like the nitty-gritty stuff that you can get into when you do a side-by-side comparison. But anyway, I won't bog this down super heavily. But he keeps this line a little bit straighter. You can tell he like curves his jump, and I don't. Okay, so if you watch Wotan, his jump is going to like curve a little bit because he's going to turn the stick. So he turns and he jumps and he gets a straighter angle for where he's going. Versus if you look at my side, I just jump straight. I don't turn my jump, I just jump like that. So he actually cuts that corner just a little bit sharper than I do. We both jump here. It looks like his jump is a little bit lower. And he's able to ramp off just a little bit sooner, but not too much. it almost looks like I'm a little ahead at this point. It's hard to tell. Like, it's really neck and neck. No, he's still barely ahead. So a lot of this, you know, it stays pretty close. He's a little ahead of me by like fractions of a second, but I'm not seeing anything that's indicating to me other than just, oh, I need to get my lines cleaner. But now he's landing like almost a quarter of a second, half second sooner than I do. His boosting there was also a little bit different, if you noticed. And that was something I would pay attention to. So he boosts in the air. He lands. He doesn't immediately boost. He waits for a marauder spawn before he triggers his boost because he's reacting. And if I'm not mistaken, in my circumstance, I just held boost the entire time. I have an input display so you can watch here. Yeah, and I just hold R2 the entire time. Right here is where things get kind of interesting, right? So this is where the biggest part of the time difference is going to happen. But this is a part that I would never have honestly paid that much attention to because I was making the jump. And that's what happens to a lot of people, right? They learn a strat, they do it, and they're like, I'm doing the strat correctly. Why am I losing time? So we'll watch here. Watch the difference in these two. Look how much further ahead he is than me now, right? And now, if you took Wotan's run out of the equation, and you just go back to my run, and maybe now that you've seen the comparison, it's already like plainly obvious. And if someone was perceptive, maybe they'd pay attention. But if you notice, when I do this jump, I just jump straight across the island. I turn and I boost. It honestly doesn't look that slow. And again, in a vacuum, if you take Wotan's clip here, he boosts, he jumps, he lands, and he boosts. So what's the difference? Again, if you were like paying a little bit of attention, it's probably pretty obvious. Wotan is turning in the air while he's jumping, and I am not, right? So my jump goes perfectly straight forward, and he comes off the rock at a slight angle so that he is already mostly turned by the time that he lands. He still has to turn a little bit in this particular clip, but we'll watch it again. He's also just a little bit ahead of me here. So normally what I would do in this particular instance is I would actually line our jumps up so that I could see how much time I'm actually losing in this jump, because he's a little bit ahead of me because of just cleaner driving in general at this given moment, right? So he hits the rock right about now, but look again at the difference. Okay, so he turns, I do not. It's pretty subtle, but I mean, if you're paying attention, you can watch it. But this is like the power of VOD review that I'm talking about, because otherwise, I mean, look how much further ahead he is than me right now. He maintained more speed than I did because he was angled and he didn't lose his momentum. And so he's able to, let me see exactly. And this is just in the last bit of the segment, right? So this doesn't count how ahead of me he already was. This is just going from the jump alone. We're on frame 3412, according to Vegas, and that's when he goes to the black screen. And then 3471. That's almost, but not quite 60. It's like 59. Yeah, so 59. Yeah. That's 59 frames, which is essentially a full second. So by the time you incorporate the time save that he got on me earlier, and I think in this particular instance, there's actually a bit more time save in the movement to Spargus. So between the movement to the car, the part of the drive before the island hops, and then in the actual act of the island hops, I lost about a second in each of those intervals, right? And that's what tends to happen a lot of times with other runners when they don't understand why they're losing time. And this is a kind of a small example. It's 3 seconds. But sometimes it can be pretty drastic over the course of long splits. You know, you end up losing, 10 or 15 seconds, and it's kind of hard to know why. A lot of times for me, that's why I like to have more splits than not, because it kind of gives me a better sense of like where I tend to be making my mistakes at. And for, further demonstration, this is something I use in tandem with VOD review. And this is going to get super nerdy, but you'll just have to bear with me. I keep separate split sheets in a Google document that I use to compare and contrast my run with other runners based on splits that I want versus the ones that they use, right? So I'll go through and I'll watch their VOD. I'll time roughly their segments with their on-screen timer. And then I will do comparisons and all that kind of good stuff to see where I'm losing time and where I'm not. You don't have to get... You don't have to get like this granular with it. It's just something that I prefer to do. because it makes this whole process a bit more streamlined. And I can refer to this all the time, and I can see like, okay, I'm faster here, but I'm like, oh no, I'm sorry, I got that backwards. I'm slower here, I'm faster here. You know, I can just use it as a quick and easy reference point to see the places where I'm like losing the most time comparing my run to other people's and all that kind of good stuff. I say that like keeping your own splits and comparing them with like the splits of other runners, but you can chop their splits up, right? You just look at the time markings on their run or retime it if you really need to or whatever. And so even if they only use like 5 splits, you know, you can just use their timer and do however many splits you want and compare each of those segments to your own segments and see like, okay, I'm losing 2 seconds here, I'm losing 3 seconds over here, and so on and so forth. And then by the end of like a 5-minute segment, you realize you're losing, you know, 10 or 15 seconds, not because of like one single mistake or because you're not doing something that they're not doing. It's actually a culmination of a lot of small things that you're not doing. Because I went through this literal process. I actually did this very split and everything just a handful of weeks ago. And I was like, I need to figure out why I'm losing time here. Because I thought I knew why, but it wasn't actually why. There wasn't like some super secret sauce. It was really just as simple as I wasn't turning in a couple spots that I should have been turning a little bit sooner. And sometimes that's all the difference that it makes, is just doing the smallest little things, or angling a jump slightly differently, so on and so forth. But unless I had looked at the VOD review, unless I had done a comparison, I probably wouldn't have noticed, right? Sometimes what I'll even do if I don't have like if I don't have a video editor available, I'll get on my computer and I'll pull up one run, and I'll pull up my run like on my phone, right? Like on my computer, I pull up Goofy's any percent run or whatever. And then on my phone, I will pull up my any percent run. And I'll literally like, I'll sync up the timestamps, right? So Goofy gets into Temple, and then I'll get on my phone and I'll line up whenever I'm about to get into Temple. You know, let's say we're starting from like this point in an any percent. This is so scuffed, I'm sorry. We're starting at this point in an any percent run. So I'll just line up the timestamps and I'll start playing the videos at the same time, and I'll hold the phone beside the computer screen so that I can, you know, kind of compare and contrast that way. So there are ways to do it if you don't have a video editor. Or you can do 2 tabs on the computer. That gets a little trickier because you can't always start them at the same time, but you can use like your best judgment and, you know, kind of like stop and pause each of the YouTube players. And there may be online tools out there that you can use that would be better for comparing videos. I personally don't know. Any of the strats that I use to compare videos works pretty well for me so far, right? Anyway, the important part of all this is like this gives me something to start with. I know that my drive is 3 seconds slower, but now I know what I need to do about it, right? And think of how different it would be. I come in, I sit down, I turn on my PlayStation, I load up the desert, and I just start driving, and I'm just practicing over and over and over and over again. What happens? What's going wrong in that scenario? The problem, it's good that I'm practicing, but a key part of the deliberate practice process is having like the goal that you're working towards and fixing like mistakes while you're making them, right? So what ends up happening to a lot of people is they're like, man, my, you know, we'll use something in Jack 1 as an example. My Forbidden Jungle is terrible. I need to practice it. So what do? You take like 2 minutes, you watch like Aslov and his, you watch his Forbidden Jungle in no LTS or something. And then you go, okay, yeah, I'll just do that. And then you sit down, you boot up your PlayStation, you go into Forbidden Jungle, and you just run it over and over and over and over and over again. You'll get gains from that, practice gains, and you will probably improve, but maybe not exactly in the ways that you're wanting to. What you need to do when you're watching somebody else's run is you need to very heavily scrutinize the things that they're doing and ask yourself, what are they doing in this scenario that I'm not doing? A way that you can do that if you're not directly comparing with your own video, right, is I'll take Wotan's run here and I'll say, okay, if the controller is in my hand right now, what am I about to do from this position, right? And so I'll almost like ghost play while I'm in my head. And anywhere where they do something that I do not do, I make a mental note of it, right? So like if I'm like, I jump now. Well, Wotan jumped a little bit later than I would have released my button, right? And you really have to think about this. This is not something that you're just casually watching. This is like kind of a grueling process. But you will get results from doing things like this because it gives you something so tangible to work for. Sometimes, top runners aren't perfect. They're going to make mistakes, which is why having something like a community gold sheet is really helpful, because then you can compare to the best known time in a segment outside of a run. Because sometimes you'll have a top run that like has a pretty critical mistake at one point. And maybe if you're newer, you don't realize it's really a mistake because it's like super subtle. And, you might end up practicing something that's like 2 or 3 seconds slower and not realize it because you're not looking at the quote unquote like best version of that particular split. VOD review really is not sitting down and watching somebody else's run. That's just, consuming content. VOD review is like a deliberate process where you are trying to nitpick your own run while simultaneously comparing those nitpicks to what somebody else is doing better. And, as you improve, sometimes you'll find that you do things, better in certain comparisons than other people do. And then you can kind of take the good things from your run and the good things from other people's runs, and you can just kind of like amass all this good stuff. And it's really good. It's very valuable to watch runs that aren't just the top runs as well. I would, if you have com golds, for your particular game or whatever, I would highly recommend referencing those. If you don't have like community golds for whatever, that was part of the reason why I had made the spreadsheet that I did, because at the time when I first started making these, we did not have community golds for Jak 3. So what I had to do was, as I watched runs, if I noticed somebody had like an incredible time in a split that was better than I had heard of in a particular split, I made a note of it and I, put it down in here so that I could have like my own kind of soft com golds or whatever. And I would have like links to the videos and things like that so I could use it as a reference. It's valuable for learning and it's valuable for practicing, because again, practicing kind of gets chalked up to just being repetition and doing things over and over and over again. And it is, but effective practice, effective deliberate practice is going in with a plan, with something that you're going to improve. When I saw this, whenever I was doing VOD review, I knew that in my next practice session, exactly what I needed to work on. I needed to work on this jump, and I needed to work on angling the car as I jumped so that when I landed, I was already pointed sideways. Being able to reference somebody else's video is such a powerful tool in speedrunning because we have all the resources necessary to like emulate what other people do. Sometimes runners will use like an input display, and I try to pay particular attention to those runs, especially if they're doing things faster than me, because I have not just what they're doing on the screen, but I have what's going on behind the scenes. Sometimes there might be something going on the controller that you can't directly see on the screen that's somehow being influenced, because like maybe they're moving the camera a certain way, but it doesn't reflect naturally in the way that the game looks because they're fighting like an automatic camera motion. And so you don't always get things like that. But more so when you find runners that run your game that use input displays, that is an indispensable tool for you to use so that you can, learn off of it. And sometimes you're watching somebody's video and you don't understand why they're doing something. Maybe they don't have an input display and you try to replicate what they're doing and you just can't replicate it. Something that you can do then is just ask them. If they're on Discord or if you have some other way of asking them, just reach out to them. In the Jak community, again, especially, people are super helpful, and people are always more than willing to ask questions, and tons of people are knowledgeable about a lot of things, and there's not really a whole lot of like secrets kept strat-wise. Not every community is like that, unfortunately, and sometimes you don't always have that luxury. And sometimes, the people that do it are like, I don't know, I just kind of do it. And so, you just take the VOD review and you analyze it and scrutinize it all to pieces as best you can. So, if you have any questions, you can just ask in the comments, or you can ask me directly through some other means if you have a way to ask in my Twitch chat, Discord, whatever. I'm always happy to help. But I just thought I'd highlight how important it is to do this process, how I approach the process and how I think about it, and the other things I do in tandem with the process in order to kind of grow and improve as a speedrunner. Because VOD review in a vacuum is only going to do so much. Knowledge is power. but you have to also act on that, right? So from the VOD review, you take things that you can apply to your practice and that you can apply to your gameplay, use it as a reference whenever you need to find something to work on, right? I'm losing time. I don't know why. You need to do VOD review. Have to, if you're going to improve at that point. Because there will come a point, as it happens to everybody. It happened to me just like a couple of weeks ago, and I'm sure it'll happen again in the near future. You know, it's just one of those things. You're going to hit stuck points where you don't understand why you can't do something faster, and you just need to look at what other people are doing, and you need to do direct comparisons, if at all possible, to find the little nuances in their gameplay in order to better guide yourself in your own practice. So, you know, TLDR, watch other runners' videos, watch your own videos, point out mistakes, see what other runners do well, incorporate what they do into your practice, and make it a deliberate point to emulate what people are doing better, because that's just how you improve. All right, thank you guys for watching. Peace out.